Hello, everyone. This is Len Schaefer, and this is another episode of Movies, Music, and Movie Music. Today I'm flying solo, so David won't be with me today, but I'm going to, as usual, talk about some of my favorite movies. Before we start, I'm actually going to do one of the million tributes to the late, great, legendary Dolly Parton. Made some notes on this, so I'm going to be consulting my notes as I talk. So not only did she create some classic and enduring songs, but of course, as I'm sure you all know, she was even better as a person. And I don't know if there was anyone who knew her and didn't love her. And, she made a difference in so many lives. As probably a lot of you have heard, she donated over 300 million books to children around the world. Just a staggering number. So she didn't just have a great music career. Of course, she was also in films, including the classic 9 to 5, one of my favorite films ever, and wrote an amazing song for that film as well. And she was also in a movie called The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, which I think is a vastly underrated and underappreciated movie. In fact, my favorite Dolly Parton song is from that movie. Called Hard Candy Christmas. There's a great solo version out there with her doing it, but there's also a wonderful version of it in the movie The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, which also, by the way, had Charles Durning and Burt Reynolds. And that song, the version of Hard Candy Christmas in Best Little Whorehouse, is just gorgeous, just so beautiful and tear-inducing for sure. At least it is for me, and I think it would be for a lot of you as well. So she also, of course, wrote I Will Always Love You, the one that was number one for Whitney Houston 20 years after Dolly wrote and recorded it herself. And if you have not heard Dolly's version of that, you should definitely check it out also. So here's to Dolly Parton, one of the truly great people, musicians, performers we've ever seen. So also, unfortunately, today, Tim Curry died. Tim Curry was best known for the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Speaking of great movie musicals, I actually saw the Rocky Horror Picture Show when it came out in the mid 70s. They had a midnight showing in Berkeley on University Avenue at the movie theater there, which is no longer a movie theater. But I went 4 weeks in a row. I loved it so much, and Tim Curry's performance was of course, epic. So here's to Tim Curry as well, another great performer that we've lost in the last few days. So as far as the movies I want to get to today, I'm going to start with one that I think, speaking of underappreciated movies, I think this one is also kind of not really talked about and not really considered a great movie, but I think it's a great movie. It's called Falling Down. It's from 1993, and it had Michael Douglas, Robert Duvall, Barbara Hershey, Rachel Tickerton, and Tuesday Weld toward the end of her career. Kind of a quirky movie, unique, disturbing, fascinating. It's about a man who's falling apart or falling down due to both his treatment by the modern world and also his own insecurities and paranoia. Couple interesting things about this one. Michael Douglas actually considered it considers it his favorite performance of all the movies he's been in. And in fact, his father, the great Kirk Douglas, also considered it to be Michael's best performance. It's also interesting that the script for Falling Down was turned down by every studio in Hollywood, and the producer was just about to make it a cable TV movie. And then Michael came across it, Michael Douglas, and he said it was one of the best scripts he'd ever seen. And he ended up taking a lot less money to do that movie to make sure that it got made. And it turned out to be a wonderful, wonderful movie. Something that some of you may appreciate also, Iron Maiden's song Man on the Edge is actually based on the movie Falling Down. And there was also a Simpsons episode, Homer's Enemy, in which the character of Frank Grimes was designed to look like Michael Douglas's character in this film. So that's kind of interesting. A lot of A-list actors were also considered for Douglas's role, including Jack Nicholson, Ed Harris, Robert De Niro, Alec Baldwin, Jeff Bridges, and a whole bunch more. So, a couple really good descriptions of the movie, I think, to sum this up. The best way to describe falling down, I think, is what someone posted on IMDb, and I'm going to read this for you. Take the hottest day of the year, a traffic gridlock, cracked pavements, dirty streets, unwarranted hostility, and a general feeling of being shortchanged. Then add the frustrations of having an estranged wife and child, an extremely jaded and unbalanced mindset, and the frustration of being obsolete with no marketable skills. Set them against the decadent backdrop of modern day LA, where if you are not economically viable, you are of no use, and the result is falling down. So I think that's a great quote and sums it up very well. It does make it sound like an endless downer, but there are actually some great moments of black comedy in it as well, and it's just such a fascinating movie. Finally, one last quote about it. A week after its release, the screenwriter, Ebby Rose Smith, that's Ebbe, I assume it's pronounced Ebby, he gave his interpretation of what Falling Down was about. To me, even though the movie deals with complicated urban issues, it really is just about one basic thing. The main character represents the old power structure of the US that has now become archaic and hopelessly lost, and it's a just or die time. So that's the movie Falling Down from 1993. Very interesting, disturbing, and yet can't take your eyes off it movie. Moving on to the next one. Excuse me. I want to talk about a movie from 1999. Now, there are a lot of movies and a lot of TV series and other things called Life. So if you do look for this movie, you have to make sure to look for the movie Life from 1999, which starred Eddie Murphy and Martin Lawrence. Excuse me. Others in the cast included Anthony Anderson, Nick Cassavetes, Ned Beatty, Bernie Mac, and Rick James, who I'm sure you all know for his song Super Freak, among many others. One side note about Rick James, he was a close friend of Melvin Franklin of The Temptations, and he produced Eddie Murphy's hit single, Party All the Time. But back to the movie Life, despite, the great comedic credentials of Eddie Murphy and Martin Lawrence, and despite the fact that I believe it was actually marketed as a comedy, and that many people talk about it as if it was a comedy, it really was not a comedy. There was certainly some humor in it, and, with those two, there would have to be. But it's really a touching and sad and dramatic story about two guys who get falsely convicted of murder, and it shows what they have to go through as a result. The acting is great all the way around, not just the stars, Murphy and Lawrence, but all the supporting characters are great, right down to the smallest of parts. I can't really say too much more about this movie without giving spoilers, but I do want to say that there will be some moments that will make you laugh, but the movie works best as a compelling, character-driven story about two black men who are framed by a white cop for murder in 1932 Mississippi, and all that they have to deal with as a result. So it should definitely hold your interest throughout and might even occasionally bring a tear to your eye. So that's Life from 1999. For my next movie, I want to talk about another one that's somewhat similar in style to Falling Down. It's also kind of a disturbing, weird kind of black comedy movie, but mostly drama. It's called The King of Comedy from 1982, and it stars Robert De Niro, Jerry Lewis, and Sandra Bernhard. It also had the debut of Mary Elizabeth Mastro-Antonio, but just in a tiny role. You would barely notice her. And it was directed by Martin Scorsese. Like I said, it's kind of a similar style to Falling Down. It's a bit extreme and larger than life, and also has some darkly comedic moments. De Niro, of course, is so good at playing guys with a screw loose, and he's another one in this one. He's a loner who dreams of being a comedy star and resorts to some extreme measures to do so. There are some great scenes of him practicing his comedic routine, and you see behind him he's got a whole wall of pictures of celebrities as if they're watching him. So as with Falling Down, it's kind of difficult to watch at times, but it's also fascinating. It has an original story and great acting. So Jerry Lewis plays a Johnny Carson type talk show host, and he's very similar to Carson in that he's very funny and charming on TV, but kind of a morose jerk in real life. And in fact, Carson was actually offered the part first and turned it down. And I can't help but wonder if that was because maybe it hit a little bit too close to home for Carson, be a little more too much like playing himself. Anyway, Jerry Lewis is great in the movie, and one clip from the movie that's kind of interesting is Jerry Lewis is walking down the street and he's stopped by a woman who's talking on the telephone. He refuses to talk to her because she's on the phone, and she says, "I hope you get cancer." So what's interesting about this scene is that that actually happened to Jerry Lewis in real life, and he in fact directed that scene himself. So a little slice of real life in there. There's also another scene that's kind of interesting in which De Niro and Robert De Niro and Sandra Bernhard are arguing on the street, and there are a few obnoxious guys who are mocking them. Well, it turns out that the guys who were mocking them were played by 3 members of The Clash. So, little music movie crossover there, kind of like with the Iron Maiden song that was based on Falling Down. Anyway, all 3 of the main actors, De Niro and Lewis and Bernhard, did a fair amount of improvising in their scenes together, and it works really well. And in fact, Bernhard actually improvised most of her lines because she had no formal acting training, and Scorsese wanted her to be as normal as possible. And I believe she comes across as normally as someone can, who's kind of a wacky character that's out of her mind. But it was really a good part for Bernhard to play because she kind of fit that personality in real life as well. So sometimes really original movies don't do well at the box office, and this one was no exception. It did very poorly. But I think with a lot of movies like this one, and with this one also, it's become much more appreciated as the years have gone by. So one thing that I think was interesting to me about Jerry Lewis's performance is that it's so different than in his comedies. You know, he's so wacky and out there in his comedies, and in this one, he's very straight-laced and kind of, as I mentioned, morose. And I think you see that a lot with these really wacky comedians, that they're very good at playing really intense, dramatic parts and delivering those roles in a way that are both natural and completely believable. I mean, a perfect example of that, of course, is Robin Williams, who, you know, was wonderful in his comedies, but I really loved his dramas even more, particularly Moscow on the Hudson, and of course, Good Will Hunting, which he won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, and Dead Poets Society, and Good Morning Vietnam, which was kind of a mix of comedy and drama. But Lewis is very good in this and very toned down from his usual manic self. So Steve Carell is actually a big fan of the movie The King of Comedy, and he partially based his performance in the 2014 film Foxcatcher on De Niro's performance in The King of Comedy. And by the way, Foxcatcher is also a good movie and also very dark and intense and hard to not stay glued to. And another big fan of The King of Comedy is Jason Bateman, who has raved about De Niro's performance and said that it is a perfect example of how to perform at a high level through a whole movie while never losing the audience's sympathy or becoming self-aware or congratulatory, which I think kind of sums up De Niro's career in general. I mean, he is, of course, a treasure, one of the great actors of our time. So the stories and characters in this film have been cited as a major influence on the 2019 movie Joker, which I'm sure you know was also a very dark drama. Anyway, just to finalize my thoughts about The King of Comedy, I think it's best summed up by another person who posted to IMDb and said, overall, the film is a combination of disturbing, entertaining, and unforgettable. And I think that one could also apply to Falling Down, of course. So now to get into a completely different kind of movie, I'm going to talk about one from 1991 called The Man in the Moon. And the biggest aspect of this that should interest a lot of people is that it was Reese Witherspoon's debut in film. She was 14 and played a 14-year-old. And it also featured Sam Waterston and Tess Harper. It's a coming-of-age story in rural Louisiana in 1957. And it was directed by Robert Mulligan, who was 83 at the time, and it was his final film before he died. Other films directed by Mulligan included the classic To Kill a Mockingbird and another beautiful coming of age film, this one about a boy, called Summer of 42. So it's interesting. The way that Reese got this part was she answered an open casting call in Nashville for extras, but she ended up with one of the best roles. And I think it's a true testament to her star quality. And of course, you see that throughout the movie. So she's living on a farm with her parents and her older sister, and a new family moves in next door. Emily Warfield plays her sister, and she was really great. Also, she's quieter and more mature. She's, I believe, plays a 17-year-old sister, so 3 years older than Witherspoon. And by the way, Emily was not the original choice for that role, but the first choice quit due to homesickness, which is interesting. It was filmed in rural Louisiana, so perhaps that was a little difficult for a teenage girl to be comfortable doing that. Anyway, in the story, Reese is attracted to the 17-year-old boy next door, who was played by Jason London. But her sister's also attracted to him. So I won't say much more about that to avoid spoilers, but I think you kind of get the idea. The Man in the Moon is really beautiful, sweet, powerful, and emotional. The acting is superb, especially by Reese Witherspoon. I think you can see right away that she's destined to be a star. And, you know, one of the great pleasures of watching The Man in the Moon would be getting to see Reese in her first role and seeing the beginning of her brilliant career. So that's it for The Man in the Moon. And as always, I'm going to end this talk about movies with going back in time to one from the golden age of Hollywood. In this case, I'm going to talk about a movie from 1941, which won the Oscar for Best Picture. It's called How Green Was My Valley. It's kind of amazing. It beat, among other great movies, Citizen Kane, which is pretty universally considered one of the top 5 movies of all time, if not number 1. But I actually find Citizen Kane to be kind of overrated. I think it's a little stilted and over the top and kind of hard to find entertaining. I just don't get into this one. Whereas this one, How Green Was My Valley, I just think is fantastic. You know, I mentioned on an earlier podcast that one of the things I have done is to see every movie that's ever been nominated for Best Picture. And one of the great joys of doing that has been to discover all of these old movies that I would probably never have seen and might have never heard of without it. And out of all of those, one of the best is How Green Was My Valley. It's an absolute gem. It's a largely unknown cast, but there are 3 names that you might recognize: Walter Pidgeon, Maureen O'Hara, and Roddy McDowall. And it was directed by John Ford, who took over early in the production from William Wyler, who had left to direct The Little Foxes. So Ford, of course, was a legendary director who is still, even to this day, the only director to win the Oscar for Best Director 4 separate times, and one of the 4 was for How Green Was My Valley. In fact, the movie was nominated for 10 Oscars and won 5, including Best Picture and Best Director. It takes place in the early 1900s in a Welsh mining village, and it centers on a family that has 6 boys and 1 girl. The parents hope that their youngest son, played by Roddy McDowall, is smart enough to do well in school and have a chance for a better life than the rest of them, because in that family, all of the adult males are already working in the mines. I think the movie does a really good job of depicting how difficult the miners' lives were, not just the work, but also their struggles against management for fair pay and just to be treated fairly in general. Interesting thing about Roddy McDowall is he had actually been evacuated from England along with his mother and sister to keep away from the Blitz at the beginning of World War II. And he'd only been in the U.S. for 2 weeks and got cast in the leading role of the youngest son in this family. So out of the many classics that John Ford has directed or did direct, including How the West Was Won, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and The Grapes of Wrath, he considered How Green Was My Valley to be his favorite. As I mentioned, he did win Best Director, and How Green Was My Valley did not only beat out Citizen Kane for Best Picture, but it also, let's see, I have here Oh, this must be in my later notes as to who else it beat out. Oh, yes, The Maltese Falcon and Sergeant York. That tells you what kind of a great year for film 1941 was, that all of those were up for Best Picture. So the original plan was to film on location in Wales, but the bombing of the UK by the Nazis, the Blitz, changed that plan and it was filmed in LA instead. So it's kind of interesting that Roddy McDowall was evacuated from England and the movie did not film in the UK, in Wales, both for the same reasons, because of the Nazi Blitz of the UK. So one thing I really loved about this movie and that I found really haunting and actually gave me chills was the singing. There's a lot of singing by the Welsh villagers in the movie, and they were authentic Welsh tunes, and it's quite they put in some effects to make it kind of echoey or reverb or whatever, and it's like hearing movies being sung in a cave or chanted by old monks or something. It's really, really magnificent. And it was actually sung by an 80-member Welsh Presbyterian Church of Los Angeles. There's a great line that Roddy McDowall says in the movie about the singing. He says, "Someone would strike up a song and the valley would ring with the sound of many voices, for singing is in my people as sight is in the eye." And, as a lover of both movies and music, which is what our podcast is about, that particular line really gives me chills and really moves me. I think it's just so beautiful. And I think it really sums up the movie very well. So, as I said, I consider How Green Was My Valley to be among the best of all the older movies. It was, I've said all this already. It was nominated for 10 Oscars and won 5, not just Best Picture and Director, but also Best Supporting Actor for Donald Crisp, who played the father of the family. It's called the Morgan family. Anyway, it's an epic, masterful depiction of a specific place and time that you will not soon forget. So those are my 5 movies for today. Thank you for watching. Once again, think great thoughts about the late, great Dolly Parton and Tim Curry. And I will see you next time on Movies, Music, and Movie Music.